specifically designed for no-coders like you and me. Now, first up, what is an API? An API can be thought of or explained better through this restaurant analogy, right? So you go to a restaurant and then you look at the menu and then request to the waiter the food that you want. And then the waiter, understands your request, goes back to the kitchen, and then the order is processed, and then the waiter responds to you with your order, right? So there is a request and then there is a response. So APIs work in the same fashion. So there is a request sent by one machine, and then the request is then understood by the backend, and then some process is done, and then they give back to you a response in a certain format. For example, you want to watch YouTube videos, then your client, which is your browser, makes an API request to the backend server, which then understands the specific video that you want to watch and then responds to you with that specific video. So there's a request and a response. Okay, so this is a better example in terms of how REST API works. And so think of REST is as a way of representing an API, right? We'll come back to that later. So this is your client, which is your browser or your mobile application or any web application. So that is a client. And then the client makes a request to the backend server. And how does the request look like? It is a HTTP request because the request is made over the internet. So if you open a browser, you're going to type http www. so and so, right? Similarly, when you make API calls, because they go over the internet, you will make a HTTP request, and then there is a method. Now, what is a method? The method is what do you want the server to do, right? Maybe you want to get a specific YouTube video, or maybe you want to post or put a specific video into the backend server, that is create or update a video. The third one is maybe you want to delete a video. So you need to tell the specific server what method that you're looking to do. And then you are going to hit a specific URI. URI is the endpoint, right? The URL. We'll understand what that is in the coming slide. But think of it as you are going to make a HTTP request by sending a specific method to a specific URI. And then the server will then get this request, understand it, and then go to the specific resource. Maybe you want to get images. So it will go to this resource which has images and then provide you with a response so that you can display it on the front end, right? So there is a request and there's a response. So this is how a typical REST API is structured. The first part is a protocol, which is a HTTP protocol. The second part is the domain name, right? Where do you want to hit, right? So that's similar to a website URL. And the third one is the path. So this is a domain, and then the path is where the resource is stored, right? So the typical website might have images, it might have videos, it might have text, and there might be multiple versions of APIs released. So you are looking for an API which is of version 3 and is in this path. And what do you want to hit? You want maybe images, so you'll hit the images endpoint. If you want videos, you might hit the videos endpoint and so on. So this is how the whole API looks like. Let's look at this through an example which will help you understand this even more, right? So to do this example, we're going to use a specific API called the Chuck Norris API. To do this, we're going to use the Chuck Norris API. So this is an API which provides you random Chuck Norris jokes, right? So if you so here you have this endpoint. There are a few endpoints that they have. So here they have this endpoint which will give you a random Chuck Norris joke. So retrieve a random Chuck Norris joke, and so this is how your response is going to be. And let's see how to do that, right? So just copy this endpoint, go to Integromat. Let's start from scratch. So I'm going to delete all of the modules that I have here. I'm going to delete everything. So I'm going to click plus, and I'm going to say, I want to make a HTTP request, right? So I'm going to choose, there are multiple other things. Let's start with the basic, which is make a HTTP request. So I'm making a HTTP request and I want to hit a specific URL, right? So paste the copied URL here. And then what method? You want to get a random joke. So I'm going to say, when you drop down, you can see a bunch of methods, but we're looking at the get method. So I'm leaving it out there. And for now, ignore the rest of things. We don't need anything. We're just gonna get a random joke from this endpoint. So I'm gonna click OK. And now right click, run this module only. And you made request is made and you get a response. So this is a request that you made, which is input. And this is the output, which shows the response. In the response, the status code 200 means the response was successful, right? So, the request was successful and we were able to get a response. And the header, you don't have to worry much about the header. You're always going to be concerned about the data. What is it that they're responding with? And they're responding with a bunch of things here, but it's very hard for you to read, right? Because it's in JSON format. So what would be better is, because if you go here, they say that your response is going to be in JSON format. JSON is a format, it's a key value format. So you have a key and then value, a key and a value, and a key and a value, right? It is a common way in which APIs respond. But to make it better, right, for you to make it readable, what you can do is go to here and then check this box called parse response. This way, Integromat will automatically parse the response and then divide it into key value pairs, and then hit OK. And I'm going to say run this module only again. And now when you click this, and now when you expand the data, you will get created at specific value. The icon URL is here, and then ID is this, and then the URL is this, and then the specific joke is this, right? Chuck Norris can enrich uranium in his popcorn maker. That's the specific joke that we got. So now it is better, readable, and then you can reuse this in subsequent formats. So that's how you make a request to an endpoint. Now, we want to do more stuff, right? So now we want to do something which is, we want to use another thing. This is giving a random joke. But what we want to do is we want to get only animal jokes, right? Jokes that belong to a specific category. To do that, firstly, we need to understand what are all the categories that are available in this API. So how can we do that? So this is an endpoint that you can do, which retrieves a list of available categories. So let's first do that. So I'm going to hit this endpoint. I'm going to update this and provide a different endpoint, which is categories. And again, I want to parse this response. And I'm going to run this. And now we can get all of the categories, right? So they have almost 16 categories here. Now in the second step, what I want to do is I want to hit this random endpoint, but I want jokes which are random jokes, random animal jokes, right? So that's what I want. So how you can do that is you do that through something called query parameters, right? So you hit that endpoint and then add a question mark and say, give me random jokes, but which belong to the specific category. So that's how you will do it. So let's see how you can do that through Integromat. So first step, we got the list of categories. Second step, I'm going to make another HTTP request and I'm going to hit this endpoint, which is the categories endpoint. And let's copy this whole, we are hitting the random jokes endpoint. So I'm going to copy this whole endpoint. I'm pasting this and we need to supply the category. So delete this last part where it says equal to, and in equal to we are going to the previous request. So as soon as you click this, it will open up the previous request, that is the request that we made here. Okay, and from there what do we want? We want to look at data, right? So if you go here, we are looking at data and we were looking at animal in data. So let's click that and click this and select one, right? So this is what will fill animal. But if you don't want animal, if you want more stuff, let's say career, then what you will do is, because it's an array, right? So you will use data square bracket to square bracket, right? This is how you do it. Now again, we want the get method and we want to parse it and click OK. Now let's run the whole thing. So this way, first request will get all of the list of categories, and then that category will be passed in the second request as a parameter, so that we'll get random jokes that belong only to category. So let's do that. Successful. So both requests were successful. In the first request, we got all of the categories, and in the second request, we got only animal jokes, right? So this is what it says. They say curiosity killed the cat. This is false. Chuck Norris killed the cat. Every single one of them, right? So that's the random joke that we get. Now, this is how you made a query, filtering query parameters, right? There's another way you can filter API requests. So how you do that is remove this query parameters from the header. So I'm going to remove it here, and I'm going to move it to the query string, right? So this is where you will provide the query parameter. So I'm going to add the query string, and what is it that we're querying for? We are querying for category. So just place that category here, and then what value are we looking for? We're looking for filtering animal jokes, right? So I'm going to say value is that. Now we can say okay, and we can run it once more, and we will get another response as well. Okay, and that is how you will do a request and a response, and that is how you can either query through this query string, add multiple query parameters here, or you can add the query string directly there. Now there's one more thing called headers, right? What are these headers called? Let's look at that subsequently. Okay, so far we have done simple requests, right? It's a get request, and you hit that endpoint, you get the category, then you're using the response data in another API call through Integromat, where you're getting a random joke of the specific category. So far so good, right? Now what about headers, and when will you use headers? This particular API, the Chuck Norris API, is an open API. Anybody can use this API. It doesn't have any username and password for you to access that API. But many applications require username and password, right? For example, let's say for our use case, in the next step, we want to add it to Airtable. Okay, so what you can do is you can use Airtable pre-built integration, or you can do a HTTP request, use Airtable's APIs to add this joke in the backend Airtable. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and added a new table called jokes, and I've created a few columns here, which is ID of the joke itself, and the category of the joke. Okay, now let's say we want to get the category of a joke, random joke, and then add it here in the jokes database. Now to do that, what you need to do is go and look at Airtable's documentation. Now let me go ahead and click account, and then from the account select the Airtable API, and then from here choose that table that you want to use. I'm choosing the user table, and then go to the specific table that you want to use, right? So in the user table, I want to go to the jokes table, right? That's the table that you're using, jokes table. So I'm going to the jokes table, and what do you want to do? We want to create a table. So it has a bunch of endpoints that you can hit. You can hit the fields endpoint, list record endpoint, so on. We want to hit the create records endpoint. So I'm selecting that, and now you have an example. So here it says use the post method. So let's create a new HTTP request, make a request, and choose the method as post. And now let's go back to the API, and it says this is the endpoint that you need to hit. So I'm going to choose this endpoint, and I'm going to hit the URL, and then whenever it says -h, that means it's a header, right? We always look for the curl definition. Okay, that's what we're going to look for, because there's also JavaScript. But when you're doing API requests, I always prefer to use the curl so that it's easy for me to follow. /h is a header. So in the header, they say you need to supply the authorization. So I'm going to go ahead and add authorization, and then I'm going to add the bearer and then the API key. Let me say show my API key here. So I'm going to select the whole thing, bearer and API key. That is the value that I'm providing. Okay, why am I doing this? So typically, when you want to view your Airtable database, you supply your username and password, and then Airtable authenticates that user against that password, and once it's valid, only then you are presented the table in the UI. But if you're making a request through the API, right, how can Airtable validate that you are authenticated, you are the correct person to show this table? Otherwise, anybody can hit the jokes endpoint, table endpoint, and get the data, right? So that's where this API key comes in, right? This API key is going to be visible only to you and you only. So Airtable is confident that only you will be able to access this table, and that's why they are allowing you to select this key. So now once you know that, that is what you're providing here. You are saying authorize me because I am the bearer of this key. So you're supplying this in the header. So Airtable will validate that this guy is a valid user. Now what else do we do? Now that you authorized it, you need to send the data, right? The data is this. This is the example of the data. Just copy the data field. And where do you provide that data? So here it says the content type is application JSON. So choose the body type as raw and choose the content type as JSON and then provide the data here. Just copy paste whatever you pasted here. Now it has two values. It has it is an array of records, right? So this is a array of records and this is record 1 and this is record 2. In our case, you know, we'll get just one response in the API and we need to just store one record. So remove the other record here. So I'm going to remove this other record. And always, you know, the last one doesn't have a comma, right? So I'm going to remove that as well. So this is correct. So this is the sample value. Now we need to map that, you know, API data here. So let's remove the ID, and like I said, you know, once you select that specific value, this will come up. So let's map the ID here. So ID, in the ID column, that is in the ID column, I want to send the ID that I got in the HTTP request that I made previously. Again, in the jokes column, I want to send the value of the jokes that I got previously. And again, in the data column, I want to supply the data that I got previously. Now when I hit OK, and then let me run it once. And let me check, I got a 422. So I think it's a invalid request. Let's check why. Why was this invalid? Okay, let me remove this and then let's run it again. It's a 200. Okay, so we got the data here. Let's check if it's successfully added here. Yes, it is successfully added here. So far, you know, we have used Integromat to run this API. So how can you invoke this API from the front end? That's what we're going to see now. First step is go to your front end application and let's create a new page called jokes. Okay. And I'm going to open that page. I'm going to add a form. Remember how we invoked, you know, added a form, captured the details of the form on the front end and sent it to Integromat in the first day. Similarly, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to search for a form, add a form, and here I'm going to say get jokes. Okay, and here I'm going to remove all of these texts. Okay, and simply I'm going to say get a random joke, and I'm going to send it to Integromat. And go back to Integromat, add a module, and the module that we need to add is a webhook, right? Go back to the first lesson where we sent the form data to the backend, and I'm going to use a test webhook. Okay, so copy this webhook, go to software and paste this webhook URL and publish this. Okay, now open this URL and let me go to that page. And let us hit OK, save this, and let's run this once. Okay, and now we have two data in the backend. So if this runs successfully, one more column should get added. So I'm going to say get random joke, and let's go back here. It is all run successfully, and one more column has been added in the backend. So isn't that awesome? Now let's see if we can display this in the front end, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the front end and I'm going to add this column and I'm going to say add dynamic and I'm going to say list, and here I'm going to say, or let's say we want to add a table. Okay, I'm going to add a table and the base that I'm choosing is the user base, the jokes table, default use grid view. I don't want it sorted. I'm going to add by default, I want 10 table values to be added. I don't want any categories. And here I don't have any image, so I'm going to remove that. The text is going to be the ID. The next one is going to be another text, and this is going to be the joke itself. Maybe we want a rich text. joke itself, and I'm going to map it to the joke. The third one is going to be another text which says category. Okay, and this time I'm going to map it to category. Okay, and that's it. I mean, this is what I want. I'm going to publish this, and let's open this on the front end. So we have 3 jokes added here. So, when you add a random joke, let's rename this to say add a random joke. And here I'm going to say add a random joke. And I'm going to publish this, and I'll open this now and say add a random joke. Okay, now the joke would have added. Yeah, we have one more added on the front end. If you refresh this, one more joke has been added. But refreshing this manually takes a lot of time, right? What if you can automatically refresh this? So you can do that by adding one more thing here. So you can at the end click here and say select webhook and say webhook response, right? So this is going to respond back to the front end a 200 status request, and we also want it to redirect. We also want to tell the front end to refresh again, right? So how can you do that? Let's quickly take a look now. So I'm gonna in the body give this. So you're sending a 200 status back to the front end and you're telling them to redirect. Where do you want them to redirect? I want them to redirect to the same page, right? So this is this page that I want them to redirect so that it refreshes automatically. And I'm going to say okay. Now on the front end, you need to add a small piece of code in order to make this refresh work. This is the small script that you need to add. Go to jokes, go to custom code and add this script. Okay, this is a standard script. I can provide that if you need to, and it's what it's going to get is it's going to get the 200 status response and the JSON data that we're sending, and it's going to parse that data and then redirect to the page that we want to. So now I'm going to hit publish, and let's also save this, and now let's refresh this page, and now let's say add a random joke. It's waiting to hear the 200 status response from the backend, and once that status response has been received, it has refreshed, and you have the data 5th column added here as well. So that's how you'll use the front end and the backend to make all of your activities. So this is how you'll make APIs. But in most cases, you don't have to make these requests yourself, right? So instead of adding a separate API call by adding this, Integromat would already have integrations with Airtable. So what you will rather do is just say add module and search for Airtable, add module, and then search for Airtable. And in Airtable, you will just say create a record, and then you will just map where you want to create that record and then map the specific column. So it will make it easier. So it has out of the box integration with a number of applications. Wherever you don't have out of the box integration, you will just use these HTTP methods to make a request, get a response, use it in any of the ways, or if you want, you can add it to the database and you can send it back to the front end and so on. Hopefully that makes sense. So other thing that you can do is, instead of we can also pass the category value from the front end, right? So right now we are getting the category in an API call and then using it there. But instead you can use the category from the front end as well. So let's see how you can do that. So I'm going to add a field here which is a text field, and the placeholder is the category, right? And so users will enter the category, or let's make this a drop down. Let's make this a drop down, and in the drop down, and you need to just provide it as a semicolon separated values. So animal is one category, and what else are the categories that we have, right? So let's save it. Let's go to the history. Let's get one detail and see what are the other categories we have. We have other categories as careers. So let's give 2 categories for users to filter. Okay, so I've added 2 categories and I'm going to publish this. Okay, and let's also test this as once with test data. I'm going to just run this alone once and send test data. Okay, so now we're getting the drop down value and the from the as part of the webhook. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. Instead of removing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to in this value, instead of getting the data from the previous request, I'm going to use the drop down value as the input. Okay, and I'm going to say okay. Now I'm going to say save, and I'm going to make it run all the time. So now let me publish this. I'm going to refresh this now, and in the drop down I'm going to choose animal and then say add a random joke. Now one more column is added, which is another animal joke.